Just imagine for a moment. You are in a sacred place, a haven of peace and prayer that has stood the test of time, holding secrets and an energy that transcends our everyday understanding. Now, imagine someone, driven by reckless curiosity, daring to cross an invisible threshold, a space that does not belong to them, a sanctuary within a sanctuary. What could happen when curiosity clashes with the sacred in such a disrespectful way? The story I am going to tell you today is about Ricardo, a tourist who, in his search for adventure and a glimpse of the forbidden, found something much more profound and disturbing than he could have ever anticipated when he entered a specific dormitory in an old convent. Before we dive into this intriguing journey, I want to make a special request. Write right now in the comments the names of people and relatives who need prayer, spiritual comfort. We will add all of these names to the main prayer that we will say with the Holy Rosary, uniting our hearts in a chain of faith. Ricardo was the kind of traveler who prided himself on going beyond the tourist trail. He sought the unexplored, the authentic, but at times this search was tinged with a certain arrogance, a feeling that all doors should be open to his insatiable curiosity. Upon arriving at the Convent of Silent Souls, a centuries-old building nestled into a verdant hill, he was immediately fascinated by its imposing architecture and the aura of mystery that surrounded it. During the guided tour, largely restricted to certain common areas and the main chapel, he overheard fragments of conversations between the guides and other staff about an older wing of the convent, rarely accessed, and within it, a particular dormitory that had remained untouched for decades, almost like a silent memorial. It was the former bedroom of a highly revered Mother Superior, known for her life of extreme penance and deep spiritual connection, who had died more than 100 years ago. The stories, told in whispers, spoke of a presence that still hovered there, not like a frightening ghost, but like an echo of holiness so intense that it became almost palpable, and that only the sisters of the highest devotion felt prepared to occasionally pray there. The explicit prohibition against even approaching that wing only sharpened Ricardo's desire to transgress. He saw it not as a warning about the sacredness of the place, but as a challenge to his audacity. For him, it was just another closed door that he needed to unlock in order to really get to know the place. He began to observe the schedules and routines of the few nuns who still lived in the convent, looking for a loophole. One afternoon, during the period of recollection and evening prayers, when the silence in the convent became almost absolute, Ricardo saw his opportunity. Losing the last group of visitors and hiding in a dark alcove, he waited for the sound of footsteps to dissipate. His heart was beating with a mixture of excitement and a slight, almost imperceptible tremor of apprehension, which he quickly suppressed with the adrenaline of the forbidden adventure. The idea of capturing an exclusive photo, of having a story that no one else would have, drove him blindly. With the caution of a thief, but the impatience of a stubborn child, Ricardo navigated the dimly lit corridors of the old wing. The air there was different, colder, filled with the smell of old wood, beeswax and something indefinable, perhaps condensed time itself. Each creak of the floorboards beneath his feet sounded like thunder in his ears, but there was no one to hear. Finally, he reached a dark wooden door, simpler and more worn than the others, with no sign, no identification, but he knew it was there. The description whispered by the employees echoed in his mind. He hesitated for a moment, the doorknob cold under his sweaty hand. An inner voice, his conscience, tried to tell him to go back, that this was a violation, a disrespect not only to the rules of the place, but to something much bigger. But curiosity, that stubborn serpent, had already sunk its teeth into his mind. He turned the doorknob slowly. As he pushed open the door, a low creak cut through the silence, and the interior of the dormitory revealed itself. It was an incredibly simple, almost Spartan room. A narrow bed with a thin mattress covered by a worn white bedspread, a small dark wooden preacher kneeling before a rustic crucifix hanging on the wall, and a tiny desk with a dry inkwell and a solitary quill. There were no cobwebs or excessive dust, as if the room had been cared for but in a way that did not disturb its ancient stillness. But what dominated the room was not the furniture, but a feeling. A stillness so deep, so dense, that it seemed to absorb all sound, all movement. Ricardo took a step inside, and it was as if he had crossed an invisible barrier. The air grew heavier, and a wave of emotions that were not his own began to invade him. It was an immense sadness, but not a desperate sadness. It was rather a resigned melancholy, permeated by a poignant longing for something divine, an incessant search for a transcendental union. As Ricardo tried to process this sensory avalanche, his eyes fixed on the prie-dieu. He imagined the Mother Superior, Sister Agnes, as she was called in the stories, kneeling there for hours, days, years on end, in prayer and penance. He could almost see her silhouette, her head bowed, her hands clasped. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind swept through the room, even though the window was closed and locked. A subtle but unmistakable scent of lilies, the flower often associated with the Virgin Mary and purity, filled his nostrils, even though there were no flowers in the room. And then, he heard it. Not a physical voice, but a deep lament, a sigh that seemed to echo from the very core of that place, laden with centuries of supplication, of sacrifice, of a faith that he, in his superficiality, could never understand. It was not a sound to frighten, but to move even the most hardened soul. And along with the sound, a fleeting image, like a flash in his mind, the suffering but serene face of an elderly woman, her eyes filled with ancient pain and unshakable hope. The impact was overwhelming. Ricardo felt a crushing weight on his chest, a deep shame for his intrusion, for his desecration of that sacred space. He had no right to be there, witnessing that spiritual intimacy, that pain and devotion exposed. His legs weakened. There was no monster, there was no threatening ghost. There was something much more powerful, the residual presence of a soul that had given itself completely to God, and that, somehow, still echoed its journey in that room. The camera he so cherished seemed like a vulgar, useless object in his trembling hands. He turned, stumbling out of the room, closing the door behind him with a care he had not had when he entered. He did not run, but walked quickly, feeling as if invisible eyes were following him, not with anger, but with infinite sadness. When he reached the permitted area of the convent again, he was pale, sweating coldly, deeply shaken. The adventure had become a brutal lesson in respect and the limits of human curiosity. Ricardo was never the same again. That experience marked him in a way that no photograph could capture, and no story told to friends could do justice to the depth of what he felt. He understood, the hard way, that certain places, certain memories, certain souls, must be left alone, revered in their stillness. Ricardo's story, as unique as it may seem in its specificity of a convent and a forbidden dormitory, resonates deeply with the intrusions that we sometimes commit in our daily lives, perhaps in a less literal way, but equally disrespectful of the sacred. How many times, in our haste or indifference, do we invade someone's emotional or spiritual space without due consideration? How many times do we judge the faith practices of others or neglect our own moments of inner connection, treating them as something secondary? Our daily prayers, the sermons we hear that should inspire us, are invitations to enter our own inner sanctuary with humility and reverence. Truly forgiving, seeking peace in the heart, desiring and working for more genuine conversions, not by force, but by example and love, and cultivating a robust faith. All of these require that we respect the sacred thresholds within ourselves and in others. Just as Ricardo learned that the dormitory was not a place for his idle curiosity, let us learn to treat spaces of faith with devotion, be it a church, our prayer room, or the heart of another. So I ask again, if there is someone in your life who you feel needs strength, light, a conversion of heart, or relief in their struggles, comment on that person's name. Let's join these intentions to our main prayer with the Rosary, interceding for one another. And you, what did you think of Ricardo's story and his transgression at the convent of Silent Souls? What was the moment that touched you the most or made you reflect on respect for sacred spaces and the spiritual journeys of others? Do you believe that there are energies or presences that remain in places of intense devotion? Leave your comment below. We would love to hear your opinion and your own experiences or reflections on this profound subject. If this story touched your heart and made you think, don't forget to like this video. And if you are not yet part of our community of faith and reflection, click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. May peace and discernment be with you all.